I still remember the first time I heard the thud behind those heavy oak doors. It wasn't a person, it was my own heartbeat, pounding so loudly that I thought it might burst my ribs. I was leaning against the confession booth's polished frame, its dark wood grain tracing familiar grooves beneath my trembling fingers. The night was quiet outside, save for the wind whispering through the pines and the distant cry of an owl. Here, in the makeshift counseling room I'd built in the east wing of my old rectory, there was nothing but shadow and expectation. I traded the stained glass sanctuaries of the church for this remote farmhouse on the outskirts of Ashwood, hoping anonymity would grant me peace. But peace is a fickle thing. Guilt invited itself in with every soul I dared to help. I'd hung a simple wooden cross above the booth's arched window, the bronze corpus shining faintly in the golden lamplight. A cheap ceramic pitcher of holy water stood sentinel beside it. It felt well, hopeful in a way. My business card read Father Daniel Reyes, private confessional and counseling. I'd printed 1,000 of them last spring and mailed them in plain envelopes to half the county. I wanted no fanfare, no announcement in the parish bulletin. I only wanted to listen. The job the church gave me after the scandal was respectable. Enough interviewing seminarians, occasionally preaching to battered souls. But I craved solitude, the hush required to excavate secrets at precisely 7 p.m. each evening. The door latch would click, and another anonymous voice would slip. Inside, no names, no eye contact, just scenes delivered into the wooden crate of my conscience. A confession booth is a curious cathedral, its walls bearing witness to half-told truths. The broken fragments spilled onto the floor like shattered glass. Tonight, though, was different. I glanced at my watch. 7:03 p.m. The notebook on my lap lay open to a clean page. I drew in a slow breath, hold sin, release judgment, and then a paper slid through the slot. I didn't look down, I waited. I huddled in the hush. Father, the hushed, ragged whisper came as though the words themselves were stained with fear. I felt my pulse skip. I closed my eyes. I have seen blood where no wound lies. My gloved hand flicked on the dim lamp above, illuminating a single sheet of lined paper, creased at the edges. I read the words through a fevered blur. Tomorrow night, at the edge of the woods beyond Miller's Creek Road, she will fall. A girl in a white dress, barefoot, chanting prayers in vain. I will watch her eyes glaze before the knife finds her throat. I will taste her fear, Father, and no one will save her. I closed the file, but the letters clung to my retina like tar. My skin crawled. My breath shuddered. A prologue to a murder. Most of my penances were trivial: thievery, adultery, the slip of rage. This was something else, something vile. My past taught me not to dismiss such words, not to chalk them up to fantasy. In the seminary, an inmate wrote a letter foretelling a riot exactly 2 days later. I dismissed it as delusion until the riot happened and 14 men died. The memory of that telegram, "Your prophecy has come true," still twisted my dreams. I closed the slot. The booth's shutter rattled as though exhaling a sigh. Silence swallowed me again. I fought the urge to bolt the door. Instead, I sank back into the creaking pew, fingertips ghosting over the edge of the notebook. Echoes of my own scandal swirled in my mind. The whispered rumor that a young parishioner and I had crossed lines we should never have approached. My resignation, the headlines calling me fallen shepherd and man of sin. I'd fled here to atone, not to be judge, jury, and executioner. But the words on that paper demanded attention. By 8 p.m., I'd prayed a rosary, thumb sliding over each bead with desperate hope that the Virgin's mercy could wash away any stain on my soul. Yet the confession's prophecy was plastered on my mind like a dead thing. I wondered if the girl in white was someone I'd seen at the grocery store, someone who'd slipped past me in the pew, or someone I'd never meet until it was too late. I rose from the pew, each joint cracking in protest, and traced my way through the narrow hallway to the front library. Dust motes danced in the lamplight over rows of leather-bound volumes. Aquinas, Augustine, Kierkegaard, Dostoevsky's Confessions of Torment. I pulled out a tome on demonology, its spine creased from decades of use, and flipped to the chapter. On prophetic damnation, the words of Saint Bridget of Sweden loomed. Beware the voice that tells you, you are powerless, for in that lie the killer blooms. Powerless. That word echoed like a verdict. I sank into the worn leather armchair and raked a hand through my thinning grey hair. Outside the window, lightning forked across the sky, an electric crack that made the glass hum. I pressed my forehead. Against the cool pane, my own reflection stared back. Hollow eyes. A priest's collar ill-fitting against a gaunt neck. The lines of too many midnight vigils etched like ravines. A man who'd lost his flock and now wrestled with ghosts. I couldn't exercise with prayer alone. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from Father Gabriel. How goes the mission? I stared at the screen, unable to compose a truthful reply. I'll call you in the morning, I typed, and then deleted it. I returned to the confessional booth. The slot gaped like an open wound. I slid the prophecy inside, unable to tear my gaze away. I whispered, Lord, grant me vigilance. But vigilance requires clarity, and I had none. A sudden tapping sounded at my office door, soft, insistent. My heart thumped as though it would leap free. Holding my breath, I opened. The door, no one there. The hallway was empty. Only my footsteps echoed. I flicked the light on and off. Off and on, nothing. Just the hum of antiquated wiring. I went back into the room. There, atop the confession booth, lay a second piece of paper. I hadn't seen it when I closed the slot. My blood froze. I approached slowly, dread coiling in my gut. Do you remember Sarah Monroe? The name struck me like a bullet. Sarah Monroe, the girl who'd sat in the first pew of St. Catherine's Cathedral, her mother's tears staining the hymn. I'd given her absolution for a trivial sin, sneaking out to meet her boyfriend. But afterward, she disappeared for 2 days, the world searching until she returned too late. Her mind shattered by some darkness no one understood. I snapped the light on and flipped the note over, blank hands shaking. I realized that my confession booth, once a sanctuary of mercy, had become a whispering chamber of dread, and tomorrow night someone would die at the edge of the woods. I closed my eyes, chanting a final prayer I barely believed, deliver us from evil. But as I knelt there in the center of that wooden cell, I wondered whether I was praying to save a girl I'd never met, or begging for my own salvation from the sins yet to come. Morning came slow, as though the world lingered in the aftertaste of midnight's terror. I woke with my collar damp against my throat, a thin film of sweat hiding under its folds, and a single thought gnawed at me. Did it happen? The grey light through the curtain revealed the scattered papers on my desk, confession slips I'd meant to file, but could not bear to touch. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Prayer did nothing to quell the dread in my chest, so I rose, splashing icy water on my face and attempted the ritual of preparing coffee. Yet each measured scoop of grounds felt like penance. I flicked on the radio in my study. The morning news crackled through the tinny speakers. Voices distantly murmuring crimes in distant towns, robberies, bar fights, a senator caught in scandal. My paper lay on the table, the headline unremarkable, Ashwood's Morning Roundup. I nearly set it alight with my trembling hands. My cell phone lit up. A text from Sheriff Walters. "Call me, it's urgent." I drained my mug, black and bitter, and stepped out into the wet dawn. The rectory driveway glistened with dew, the pines sagging under last night's rain. My boots crunched on gravel as I made my way to the sheriff's car parked by the small chapel. Sheriff Walters himself looked grim in the seat, jaw clenched, the brim of his hat casting a shadow over tired eyes. "Father," he greeted, voice low. He didn't sound like a man delivering good news. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Sheriff, what is it?" "Body found last night," he said, voice hollow. "At Miller's Creek Road." A cold tremor ran through me. My breath caught. I grasped for something air, a prayer, anything. "Heard you might want to know." He handed me a crumpled police report. My eyes blurred over the forensics details. Victim female, mid. Cause of death knife wound to the throat. Location edge of the woods. Time of death estimated between 11:45 p.m. and midnight. Witnesses? None. No prints, no cell phone pings, just footprints in the mud leading into the trees. I backed against the car, heart hammering. The description matched the note almost exactly. The white dress, the woods, the chanting detail. Heard her voice barely above a whisper. My hands shook as I folded the report. The world narrowed to the single dread. It happened. "Any ID?" I whispered. "Name's Jessica Marlowe," he said, eyes fixed on the distance. Local girl, worked at the diner on Route 9. My mind raced. I'd never met her, but the name felt like a curse. Coffee spilled from the thermos, resting in my hand. Sheriff Walters reached out, patting my shoulder. "Take it easy, Father. We'll get to the bottom of this." I nodded, voice absent. My walk back to the rectory felt like wading through molasses. Each step heavier than the last dot inside. The house felt empty, no comforting creaks, no faint smell of incense, just the damp chill seeping through the old floorboards. I paced the hallway, glancing at my reflection in the antique portrait frames. Myself, younger, preaching hope with open arms. That man seemed like a stranger. In my office, the confession booth door slammed shut as the wind gusted through an open window. I set the police report on the desk, alongside the prophecy slip. They stared at each other, one foretold, one fulfilled. My legs felt unsteady, so I sat down and pressed my forehead to the desk. My blood pounded in my ears, drowning out the whisper of the notebooks piled high on the shelf. I thought of Sarah Monroe, blank note, empty pageant. Now Jessica Marlowe, flesh and bone in a shallow grave. What kind of darkness commands such horror? I forced myself to dial Father Gabriel. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up. "Daniel, is everything all right?" His voice was bright, unsuspecting. I closed my eyes. Words tasted like ashes. "There's been a murder." A silence stretched. "Daniel, what are you saying?" I received a confession. My voice trembled. "A prophecy, last night, at the edge of the woods. She fell." Gabriel hesitated. "This sounds like nonsense. You sure he's here, Gabriel? A killer who writes to me." Gabriel's sigh carried concern and frustration. "You're not a cop, Daniel. You can't." "I know," I snapped. "But I have to do something." He paused. "Talk to Walters. Stay safe." The line went dead. I sank into the desk chair, palms braced on the stained wood. A confession booth was meant to be a place of absolution, not a harbinger of death. Yet here I was, caught between my own past sins and a killer's cruelty. I stood abruptly, grabbing my coat. If I was of no use to the sheriff's investigation, at least I could see the scene for myself. I pocketed the police report and the prophecy slip, tucking them into my jacket. Then I slipped out, locking the door behind me. The late morning sky was overcast, the clouds low and leaden. The road to Miller's Creek was narrow, flanked by pines that stabbed the grey sky. I drove slowly, knuckles whitening round the steering wheel. My collar felt like an anchor in my throat. When I arrived, the woods were cordoned off with yellow tape. 2 patrol cars sat parked, their engines off. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, strangely peaceful. Sheriff Walters met me at the tape, eyes dim but respectful. "I'm not here to interfere," I said, voice steadying. He nodded. "Stay with me. Just look, don't touch." Inside the tape, the body lay face up in a shallow depression. Her white dress was stained, crimsons, marring the fabric. The mud clung to her calves, and tiny evergreen needles were tangled in her hair. Her mouth was slightly open, as if mid-chant. My breath hitched. I stepped closer, eyes fixed on the subtle details, the angle of her wrists, the way her fingers curled. She looked so fragile, so innocent. A forensics tech hovered, clipboard in hand, but kept her distance. I stared at the blade wound crisp, clean like an artist's stroke of finality. Time collapsed around me. The wind sighed through the pines in accents that sounded like hushed voices. I felt the booth's gloom, the prophet's words burning in my pocket. Sheriff Walters cleared his throat. "You recognize her?" "No." I swallowed, tasting iron in my mouth. "I don't, but I did, in a way. I recognized the helplessness, the fear, the utter lack of defense. I remembered that white dress from my nightmares, as though I'd painted it with my own guilt." Walters watched me, brow furrowed. "You're sure this is connected?" I looked down at the prophecy slip. "It's the same, every detail." He glanced at the slip in my jacket. "Then you must show this to the DA, but not me," I hesitated. Then nodded, understood. As they guided me back to the road, I felt a hornet's nest of questions buzz in my mind. Who was the killer? Why me? Why confessions? That night, sleep eluded me. Shadows sprawled across my room like ink. Each creak of the house sounded like footsteps approaching the confession booth. My mind raced between images of Jessica's lifeless body and the dozens of anonymous sins I'd listened to, all laid bare in that booth. I lit a candle and set it in the window, a feeble lighthouse against the gathering dark. My journal lay, open to a blank page. With a trembling pen, I wrote, "I am ensnared in a confessional for demons. The next confession slip will decide my fate or Jessica's justice." I closed the journal, the candle's flame flickering as though in warning. I prayed, though each word felt threadbare. "Lord, grant me strength to see the truth and mercy for the sins to come." Outside, the wind rattled the window pane, and I imagined the soft pad of footsteps in the hall, an echo of a voice yet to confess, and I realized I was alone with the voices in the dark. Sleep abandoned me long before dawn. My mind replayed the night's revelations like a broken record, The prophecy's ink, Jessica's lifeless form, the urgent scratch of pen on confession slip. Every time my eyelids fluttered shut, I swear, I heard faint murmurs, snatches of prayers warped into something sinister, desperate for distraction. I unraveled an old rosary, its beads smooth and worn from half a century of fingers tracing the decades of my life. The crucifix at its end was cold metal against my palm. I began the prayers by rote. Our Father, Hail Mary, Glory be, but the words felt mechanical, empty. My tongue stuttered over the familiar phrases, and with each bead, my heartbeat thundered, tick, tick, tick. A confession booth should be a sanctuary of absolution, yet mine had become a mausoleum of dread. I pictured the next murder unfolding, the killer hovering over some innocent soul whose heartbeat matched my own. Was I too late to stop him? By mid-morning, exhaustion gave way to grim resolve. I retrieved the hidden audio recorder I'd installed in the confession booth days ago, hoping to capture ambient noise, coughs, perhaps even the unique timbre of a guilty voice. The recorder lay tucked beneath my desk, its tiny LED blinking. Green, still active. I pressed play. Static crackled. Then a faint male whisper, "You won't catch me, Father." My blood ran cold. I rewound, listened again. The room fell silent except for the hiss of tape. And then, buried deep in the static, came the words. "The next one is closer than you think." I slammed the recorder down. My rosary beads slipped through my fingers like polished stones, clattering across the desk. The prophecy had been printed in ink. This was spoken into thin air. The killer knew my precautions. He played a game, one didn't understand. Every move exposed my vulnerabilities. I spent the afternoon combing through confession slips. 13 in total since opening day. Petty theft, marital infidelity, suicidal thoughts, blasphemous urges. None had foreshadowed violence until the first. I stacked them in piles. Mundane scenes here, troubling whispers there. Each slip was anonymous, only the handwriting varied. I studied the paper grain, the pen pressure, the curves of the letters. But the prophetic one was a perfect match only to its crime scene at 4 p.m. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I hesitated before reading. Look in the box. I knew what box meant, the confession slot. My pulse galloped. I grabbed the heavy-bodied flashlight from the drawer and stalked to the booth, each step echoing in the hollow corridor. The maples outside trembled in the waning breeze, their shadows flickering like phantoms. I knelt at the base of the booth. A half-moon of light revealed a small cardboard box tucked just beneath the confessional seat. My heart pounded against my ribcage. With trembling fingers, I lifted the lid. Inside lay a single rose, its petals blackened at the edges, as though charred by fire. Embedded in the bloom was a silver locket engraved with the initials J.M. Jessica Marlowe. I recoiled, nearly dropping the flashlight. The air seemed to thicken, pressing against my lungs. I stared at the locket, slick with something sticky old blood. My stomach lurched. A folded note lay beneath the locket. I unfolded it, hands shaking so violently that the paper crumpled. Imprecise, looping script it read, "Every bead carries a life. Count them carefully." I backed away, the beam of the flashlight sweeping across the booth's interior. The hidden recorder blinked its green LED. I swallowed. The rosary still lay on my desk, 15 beads, not counting the crucifix. 15 lives, 15 sins, 15 potential victims. My throat tightened. I staggered to my knees and pressed the rosary between palms, yielding to paralyzing fear. I weighed the possibilities. Was the killer one of my penitents? Someone who mistook my confessions for counsel? Or was it someone close to me, exploiting my own guilt? As evening approached, exhaustion and terror warred for dominance. I couldn't trust my senses. Shadows in the rectory seemed to twist into human shapes. Floorboard creaks sounded like footsteps pacing just beyond my view. I tried lighting candles to soothe my mind, but the flickering flames only deepened the gloom. Dancing like derisive specters, I forced myself to pray, "Lord, give me wisdom." But the silence that followed was suffocating. Instead of heavenly comfort, I felt watch ties tracing my every tremor. Resolute, I retrieved my coat and flashlight and ventured outside, determined to search the grounds. The dusk pressed down, blue-black clouds rolling above. I traced the perimeter of the property. The chapel, the small orchard, the stream at the back. All familiar landmarks now looked alien, hostile. At the far fence, I found footprints just like Jessica's at the crime scene. They led toward the woods. My flashlight beam trembled as I knelt to inspect them. No shoe prints, though I'd often seen teens kicking off their sneakers on late-night dares. These were prints of a single foot, each toe pressed in the wet earth with alarming clarity. I stood, shining the light along the tree line. The woods yawned before me, darkness pooling beneath the trunks. My breath caught. Each gust of wind rustled the pine needles like soft whispers. A voice behind me made me spin. "You shouldn't have come out here alone." I swung the flashlight. Beam slicing through the night, fog and found nothing but empty air. My heart hammering, I called out, "Who's there?" But the only reply was the rustling wind. I hurried back to the house, locking the door with 2 bolts. Inside, I dropped the locket and rosary onto the table, my hands slick with sweat. I leaned against the door, trembling, breath ragged dot my mind. Crawled back to the recorder's words. "The next one is closer than you think. Closer to me, to someone I knew." I sat at the desk, chest heaving, and flipped on the recorder's playback one more time. Static at first. Then, "Tonight, I walk among you. Check the faces in your flock. One will betray." My vision blurred. Was the killer in my own congregation, somewhere in these solemn walls? Or was it a delusional, twisted echo of the scandal that had claimed my vocation? I realized then that my every breath, every prayer was now a countdown. Each bead on the rosary was a tick of an unseen clock, and with every tick, the killer drew nearer, perhaps even to this very room. I closed my eyes and clutched the rosary. To my chest, the beads felt heavier than stones, like iron weights pulling my soul downward. I whispered through chattering teeth, "Speak, Lord, if you will, for your servant hears." Silence answered thick, suffocating, and in that silence, I found the truth. I was utterly, helplessly alone with the ticking rosary of death. I barely remembered the road back to the rectory. Every headlamp blur felt like a phantom pursuing me. Inside, the house loomed, silent and oppressive, as though it too awaited the next confession of blood. I slumped into the worn armchair. In my study, rosary beads slipping through my fingers, my mind churned. Am I losing my grip? Or is someone orchestrating this nightmare? Before I could pray, a soft knock sounded at the front door. My heart seized in my chest. No one visits at this hour. I peered through the peephole. A tall silhouette stood in the yellow porch like broad shoulders, head bowed, hands clasped in front. I unlocked the door with trembling fingers. Father Reyes. The voice was calm, resonant, unexpectedly gentle. Forgive the hour, may I come in? He stepped inside without waiting, removing a worn leather satchel. He wore a simple, dark suit, no clerical collar, but his bearing was unmistakably reverent. My name is Caleb Martian, he said, offering a hand. I've traveled some distance, seeking counsel. I gestured to the study chair, wary. You know my name. I'm not offering confessions tonight. He sank opposite me, face half lit by the desk lamp. His eyes were sharp, pale, green, keen observers, I thought, as though they'd read the confessions in my soul. I don't need anonymity, he said softly. I come with questions about faith and about you. My grip tightened on the armrest. Questions about me. He nodded. Rumors swirl, Father. A priest who left the church under scandalette still hears confessions. I wondered why. His candor startled me. His eyes didn't betray judgment, only curiosity and something deeper, a knowing that unsettled me. I leaned back, folding my arms. I sought a place to serve without bureaucracy. I said carefully, to atone. He studied me, lips curving in what might have been sympathy or mockery. Atonement is a difficult path. Tell me, Father, do you believe in redemption? I swallowed. I pray for it every day. He reached into his satchel and withdrew a confession, slip neatly folded, edges crisp, then explained this. My breath stuttered as he unfolded the paper. It was blank on the outside. Inside, in the same looping script of the prophecy, were words I'd seen only once. Do you remember Sarah Monroe? The paper fluttered as I snatched it back. Where did you get this? I demanded, voice tight. His expression remained calm, almost clinical. I have my ways. He tipped his head. Sarah Monroe, the girl who never spoke after your absolution. They say you visited her in the hospital. The mention of Sarah Monroe stung like acid. I remembered the scandal. A teenage girl, broken by grief, drawn to my counsel. I'd sat by her bedside, praying with her, pressing holy oil to her palms. The next morning, she'd slipped into a coma. Doctors called it sudden viral meningitis. Whispers called it something else. I called it failure. I visited, I whispered. But that was before I resigned. He leaned forward, eyes burning with quiet intensity. And after, did you ever ask for her forgiveness? I hesitated. Forgiveness? For what? My scandal had been less about guilt and more about judgment. My resignation letter spoke of impropriety and church discipline, never her name, never my responsibility. I don't know, I admitted. He smiled, a gesture that barely touched his eyes, like moonlight on still water. Perhaps you should. He stood, folding the slip. I'm here to guide you, Father, if you let me. I swallowed, torn between suspicion and relief. His presence felt both a bomb and a blade. He spoke of scripture, redemption, the human soul with theologians' precision and counselors' warmth. As midnight crept in, I found myself sharing fragments of my life, the scandal, the loss of my faith in the church's mercy, my belief that redemption lay in serving others, no questions asked. He listened as though each confession were a sacred trust. When I paused, he offered insight that cut too close to truth. Guilt is a burden we carry for sins known and unknown. But sometimes, the shadows we fear are reflections of ourselves. I shivered. Was Caleb probing me, or offering clarity? My mind raced back to the prophecy and the locket, the voices on the recorder. Am I the killer? The thought was absurd, yet his words pricked at the edges of my doubt. Finally, he closed his satchel. "I will return tomorrow night," he said. "Another confession awaits, I'm sure." He paused at the door. "Prepare yourself, Father. The next revelation will shake you to your core." With that, he left, the latch clicking shut behind him. I stood in the doorway, chest heaving, and stared out at the moonlit lawn where his silhouette had vanished. Inside, silence swallowed me. The house felt emptier than before, its walls alive with Caleb's echo. I realized I'd never asked how he found me, or why he claimed the authority to intervene. My rosary lay on the desk, untouched since morning. I picked it up, running the beads through my fingers. 15 sins, 15 victims each, bead a reminder. And now Caleb Martian had added a 16th element, doubt. Was he confessor, counselor, or conspirator? A shepherd bringing solace, or a wolf leading me to slaughter? I sank into the armchair, palms pressed against my temples. Shadows flickered in the corners of the room, charged with cosmic irony. A priest once servant to the divine, now enslaved by mortal fear. I knew sleep would not come. Tomorrow night, another confession, then another death or revelation. And Caleb would be there, watching me unravel. As the clock ticked toward dawn, I whispered a prayer, not for mercy, but for clarity. Reveal the truth, Lord, before I lose myself completely. But the only answer was the hush of empty halls and the echo of my own desperate confession. I was a man adrift in a sea of sins, with no harbor in sight. You said. The night air pressed heavy against my skin as I sat in the study, trying to steady the tremors in my hands. Caleb's visit replayed in my mind in slow motion, his pale eyes, the prophecies slip, his parting words that another revelation would shake me to my core. But nothing he'd said compared to the note I found that evening beside the locket. It named me Dot. The note lay before me on the desk. Its stark white surface stained at one corner with a dark smudge I dared not touch. The looping handwriting was unmistakable, the same that had predicted Jessica Marlowe's death and held Sarah Monroe's memory like a curse. I reached for it with a trembling finger and read the words aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. Tonight, the lamb becomes wolf. Your hands will bear blood that is not your own. Judge yourself, Father, before the world does. My breath hitched. The implication was clear. I would be accused of murder. Worse, that I might commit it myself, in a blackout of guilt and obsession. My mind flashed back to the knife wound on Jessica's throat, to the sterile county morgue, to Sheriff Walters's solemn eyes. Am I capable of such darkness? I pressed my palms into my eyes, as if to block out the accusation. The weight of my collar felt like an iron yoke, pressing the guilt deeper into my chest. I remembered kneeling in front of the confession booth every morning, asking for mercy, and realized I had never considered mercy for myself. I rose and paced. The study, walls lined with theological tomes that offered no comfort. My journal lay open, pages filled with inked prayers and frantic scribbles tracking each confession's timing. I'd started writing down names impossible, I told myself, because the confessions were anonymous. But I'd noted the posture, the weight of the paper in my hand, the faint scent of someone else's desperation at midnight. Unable to bear the stifling air of the study, I retraced Caleb's steps to the confessional booth. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the empty pews like a divine spotlight. I knelt before the slot and slid in the note. A soft click made me freeze. The booth's shutter opened. I peered inside. The wooden seat was empty, but on its cushion lay a small vial of crimson liquid blood. I recoiled, stomach twisting. The glass vial bore no label, but the scent was unmistakable. Copper and iron. My flashlight flickered and died. Darkness swallowed me whole. I heard a soft scraping behind me, like fingernails on wood. My heart thundered as I fumbled for my coat pocket, my fingers closing around the heavy flashlight. I clicked it back on, beam slicing the gloom. Nothing. The aisle was empty. The booth's door swung open slightly as though someone had just stood up and walked away. I stumbled back, pressing my back against the wall. My breath came in rapid gasps. Hand trembling, I picked up the vial. The blood inside glistened as though fresh. I wondered, whose blood is this? I remembered the prophecy. I would bear blood, not my own. If I carried that vial in my pocket tonight, would it smear me with guilt when the sheriff stopped me? A trap set to frame me, or a confession of the killer's intent to force my hands into a sin I did not commit? I fled the booth and pounded down the hallway to the study, slamming the door behind me. I locked it, then shoved the journal in front of the doorknob to bar it. The room's single lamp cast long shadows that trembled on the walls. My reflection in the window stared back at Mahalo. Haunted eyes ringed red. I pressed the vial to my lips, not to drink, but to smell its essence. The cloying temps of death. I wavered, my mind spinning. If I cut myself with this, would the blood on my hands be mine, or hers? I shook my head violently and set the vial down. Logic returned with a cold clarity. This was a plant, a device to unhinge me, but who had placed it there? Caleb, one of my penitents. Someone who knew the layout of this house so well they could slip in and out without detection. My gaze drifted to the rosary beads on the desk, each bead a promise and a threat. I needed a plan, but what plan could a disgraced priest devise against an unseen adversary orchestrating such malevolence? I opened my journal and penned one line. If I die tonight, let this be my last confession. I seek only the truth. With that, I dressed in my heaviest coat, pocketed the journal, the vial and my flashlight, and prepared to face the night. I stepped outside into the storm, rain lashing my face, wind tearing at my collar. Each breath was a howl. I followed the same path to the woods, feet slipping in the mud. I paused at the tree line, lightning revealing footprints leading deep. Between the trunk's single, bare footprints, like a trail made by the killer. I shone the light along them, watching as the beam danced over broken branches and scattered needles. A voice drifted through the gloom, too close to be the wind. Father Reyes. My heart galloped. I called out, "Who's there?" Silence. Then a soft chuckle, echoing among the trees. It sounded familiar, like Caleb's low timbre, or perhaps my own voice, twisted by fear. I stepped into the woods, each crack of branch beneath my boot sounding like a gunshot. My flashlight beam shivered over twisted tree trunks, over moss-covered stones, over a body lying face down in the muddy undergrowth. I froze. The girl's dress was darker here, caked with mud. I wheeled myself forward, swallowing bile. Her hair fanned out, damp and tangled. My beam fell on her wrist's deep cuts, blood still. Fresh. Somehow, I recognized her. I'd seen her at the diner. The gorgeous innocence now marred by terror. I dropped to my knees beside her, hands shaking so violently that my knees rattled with each tremor. "No, no," I whispered, pressing my fingers to her pulse point. "Please, be alive." I felt nothing. My flashlight fell to the ground, rolling to a stop some yards away. I crawled after it, knelt, and turned the beam back to her face. The eyes, open, fixed on nothing, glazed with death. A wind rustled overhead. I heard the whisper again, "Count the beads, Father." I looked down at my rosary peeking out of my coat pocket. 15 beads, then the crucifix, one soul left, one victim remaining. I rose unsteadily, covers of rain dripping from my collar. My hands reached into my pocket, closing on the rosary. The words of the prophecy slipped in my mind like poison. Your hands will bear blood that is not your own. I looked around, breath ragged. No footprints led away from this spot. Only the single trail of the killer, looping home. I knew I could not return to the rectory. Not now. Whatever the next step was, it had to be mine. I turned back toward the path, each footstep in the mud a drumbeat of impending doom. With every step, my rosary beads tapped together, a ticking countdown echoing in my mind. One sin left to confess. One life left to savor. One world left to shatter. And as I stumbled out of the trees, I whispered into the night, "Reveal yourself." Rain had turned the earth around the rectory into a slick quagmire, each step outside a battle against the sucking mud. By the time I reached the kitchen, my boots were caked and sliding, my coat soaked through. The house felt alien, every floorboard grown a reproach, every shadow a silent sentinel. I forced myself to the desk in my study, sliding into the chair with a groan of protest from my back. My journal lay open at the last page. The words I'd written if I died tonight. "Let this be my last confession," stared back at me, accusing. I closed the book and squinted at the vial of blood and the silver locket beside it. The rain drummed against the window pane, a mocking metronome counting down the moment I would confront the killer, or be confronted myself. I needed evidence and clarity, but sleep was beyond reach. So I reached for the hidden recorder one last time. Flicking it on, I pressed play. The static crackled, and then one remains. The shepherd betrayed. The voice was smoother this time, but with an edge that sent ice through my veins. Shepherd betrayed. The phrase echoed, resonant with betrayal, guilt, and ruin. My gaze flicked to the crucifix on the wall, Christ's outstretched arms, offering forgiveness, but I felt only condemnation. I shut off the recorder and exhaled. My plan formed in the haze of exhaustion. Review every confession slip, every audio clip, every scrap of evidence. Pattern recognition might identify the killer or at least narrow the suspects to someone in my orbit. If not to save another life, then to clear my own name. I rose and fetched all the confession slips from the booth stacked neatly in a pigeonhole beneath the desk. 13 mundane sins and 3 prophetic slips. I laid them across the desk. In chronological order, the early ones stained with coffee rings, the later ones pristine as tomb markers. I lit a single candle, its small flame throwing trembling light across the papers. The first slip was penned by a clerk at the grocery store. I stole aspirin for my daughter's fever. The handwriting was neat, spider-every small letters, tight loops. The second belonged to a mechanic. I lied to my wife about my time card. Chunky letters, heavy pressure. I noted the variations, my pen dancing in the margins, hand size, pen type, slip placement. Then I reached the first prophetic slip, the jagged handwriting of a man trembling with anticipation or malice. Tomorrow night she will fall. The pen's ink was slightly faded, as though it had sat too long on the shelf. The next slip, Sarah Monroe's name had looped curves and uniform pressure. The third, the lamb wolf note on my desk, was bold, almost theatrical. I studied each until my eyes burned. There was no obvious similarity, no consistent angle or tilt, unless I had missed something. A faint watermark on the paper, a smudge of rosary oil. I rifled through my shelves for the original boxes of slips. They were identical, plain stock, nothing to identify. I slammed the last slip down. Frustration and sheer fatigue clashed in my chest. My head throbbed. I needed a break, some clarity. Outside, the rain had paused. Great swaths of moonlight broke through the clouds, spotlighting the garden behind the rectory. My years in the church had taught me that gardens could be places of rebirth or judgment. Here, the flower beds were overrun, the paths choked with weeds. I stepped outside, journal and recorder in hand, rain ringing through my soaked hair. The garden was eerily still. The headstones of the small cemetery beyond glinted in the lunar glow. I walked the cracked stone path, stopping at the rosebush, its blossoms blackened by frost and blood. I half imagined. My fingers traced the thorned stems, recalling the black rose I'd found in the booth. Somewhere in this overgrowth lay truth. I knelt beside the long neglected fountain at the garden's heart, a carved stone basin, now dry and cracked. In its center, half hidden by ivy, I spotted something glinting silver. Heart pounding, I brushed away leaves to reveal the locket, Jessica Marlowe's locket, the same engraving, unblemished this time, as though freshly planted. I stared at it, mind swirling. Someone had moved it here, but why? A warning, a trophy. I closed my fist around it, its weight cold and accusing. A sudden rustle made me spin shadows, shifting at the edge of the garden. I swept my flashlight beam across the undergrowth. At the far fence stood a figure in dark clothing, face obscured by a hood. My breath caught in my throat. "Who are you?" I called, voice cracking, no answer, only the whip of dead leaves in the breeze. The figure lifted a hand, clutching a single slip of paper. I lunged forward, stumbling through the thorny bushes. But by the time I reached the fence, the figure was gone, leaving only the slip pinned to the wood by a rose thorn. With shaking hands, I pried the paper free. The handwriting was unmistakable, bold, slanted. Judgment awaits the fallen shepherd. A final blow. Judgment, betrayal, murder, guilt, all woven into a single phrase. The figure had vanished like smoke. The only sound was my ragged breathing and my heart's pounding so loudly I feared it might be heard in the chapel. I retreated indoors, sealing the doors behind me. Inside, the candle guttered, the pages of the journal fluttering. I collapsed at the desk, locket and confession slip spread before me. The remedy I'd sought evidence, logic had only deepened the void. If the killer was someone in my congregation, someone with access to the house and knowledge of my routines, suspicion fell on every face I'd ever greeted at the booth. The mechanic who confessed adultery, the grocery clerk, even Caleb Martian, whose theological insight and timing were too precise to dismiss. My phone buzzed, startling me. A text from Caleb. "Meet me in the chapel, now." My stomach bottomed out. I stared at the screen. The chap alone, in the dark, with a killer on the loose. Caleb knew I'd be tempted to go, but this time I hesitated. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer. "Lord, shield me in the valley of shadows." I grabbed my coat, shoved the locket and journal into the pocket, and stepped toward the chapel door's edge, step a winding, descent into the heart of my own guilt. The heavy wood doors groaned as I pushed them open. Inside, the pews lay in darkness. The altar a faint silhouette. A single candle burned on the communion table, its flame steady despite the drafts that whispered through cracked windows. I approached slowly, senses alert. At the altar rail stood Caleb, back turned, head bowed. I swallowed. Caleb. He turned, face calm under the candlelight. But his eyes were different, cold, distant. He held the final prophecy slip between his fingertips. Welcome, Father. His voice was soft, welcoming and final. In that hush, I saw the chapel transform from sanctuary to execution chamber. The locket and diary felt like lead in my pocket, condemning me. My rosary dangled at my waist, each bead a question, each pulse a verdict. Caleb folded the slip, pocketed it, and stepped closer. The last confession, he whispered, will free you, or bind you forever. And as the candle's glow flickered across his face, I realized I had reached the garden of my guilt. There was no escape now, only the final hour of judgment where faith and morality would collide, and only one soul would emerge unbroken. I straightened my collar, heart thundering like a death knell, and whispered back, reveal your truth. The distance between us shrank. The world held its breath. The final confession awaited. The chapel's single candle guttered in the draught, casting long fingers of light that trembled across the stone floor. My pulse thundered in my ears, no longer the quiet rhythm of prayer, but the frantic beat of a man who has lost his peace. Caleb stood at the altar rail, the last prophecy slip-folded in his hand, eyes unreadable. I swallowed, the words choking me. The last confession will free you, or bind you forever. I stepped forward, the hem of my cassock whispering against cold flagstones. Each footfall felt leaden, as though I carried the weight of every sin ever confessed within these walls. I reached the altar rail, placing my hands atop its polished edge, fingertips slick with sweat. Father, Caleb intoned, voice low, you've heard the voices. You've witnessed prophecy and blood. Now, you must speak your own truth. Confess. My throat constricted. To confess is to lay bare your soul, your darkest impulses, your shameful deeds. And I had done both. Real sins of pride and negligence, and others conjured by fear. Every confession slip I'd read, every note I'd taken, fed the spiral of doubt until reality and hallucination merged. But this moment demanded clarity. I confess, I began, voice wavering. I inhaled, tasting brimstone and candle drip on my tongue. I confess that I have failed in my duty as shepherd. I have judged harshly, cared sparingly, and abandoned souls when they needed me most. Caleb's gaze remained fixed, unblinking, as though he catalogued my every syllable. I confess that I turned my back on Sarah Monroe. When her mind broke and I never asked her forgiveness. I confess that, in my shame, I fled the church rather than face the consequences of my own weakness. My hands shook as I unclasped my rosary, rolling the beads through my fingers. I confess that Jessica Marlowe's death haunts me, though I knew her only as another penitent. I confess that every whispered sin I heard, lust, lies, theft, felt less significant than this darkness now consuming me. Caleb's lips curved in a faint, inscrutable smile. Continue, Father. I straightened, summoning the courage to speak the words that knotted my soul. I confess that I feared the prophecy slip would come true, and in that fear, I became complicit. I hid evidence. I doubted law enforcement. I allowed my guilt to blind me to the truth. He nodded slowly. The candlelight glinted in his eyes like a challenge. And your final confession? My breath trembled. The hall seemed to constrict. Around me, the walls closed in like the booth where I once sat in silent judgment. I closed my eyes, seeking strength in prayer, but found only the echo of my own voice. I confess that I faltered, then steeled myself, that I am no killer. The words rang out, a defiant trumpet in a sepulchre of doubt. I confess that I have been framed, manipulated by someone who knows my every fear, my every secret. This game of blood and confession was never mine to play. I opened my eyes, meeting Caleb's stare directly. So I pray now, reveal your truth. Show me the face behind the prophecy. For a long moment, he remained silent. The candle flickered, and in the wavering light, I saw his features shift, calm mask, cracking, revealing anger, or perhaps pity. Last he spoke, "You truly believe you are innocent?" "I do," I said, voice firm despite the tremor in my chest. "And I confess to nothing more than seeking the truth, than saving lives, if I can." He sighed, folding the last slip and pressing it into my palm. "Then take this, the final prophecy." I unfolded the note. In the same looping script were 3 simple words: "I am one of you." My breath hitched. All this time, I had believed the killer was an outsider, stranger hiding behind anonymity. But the final confession turned that notion inside out. The killer walks among the faithful. I looked up at Caleb. His face was impassive, yet something in his eyes flickered pride or sorrow, I could not tell. "Look around," he whispered. "You've been gathering evidence in this room: confession slips, audio recordings, coffee-stained notebooks, all that points to anonymous facelessness. But the killer's greatest weapon is belonging. They know these halls, these routines, these hidden places." I swallowed hard, mind racing through every person I'd encountered. The grocery clerk, the mechanic, the bailiff, the bartender at the roadside diner, the parishioners who'd come seeking absolution. Anyone could wear the collar of faith, yet hide a knife. Caleb stepped back into the shadows. "You spoke your truth, Father. Now know theirs." He lifted an arm, and in the darkness behind him, soft footsteps emerged, slow, deliberate. My heart leaped. I swung my gaze across the pews, catching movement. A figure stepping into the candlelight, one of my own penitents, their face pale, eyes hollow. The figure's hands were clenched at their sides. I recognized the stance, the gait. "No," I whispered. "The figure, Mrs. Callahan." The widow, who confessed to shoplifting her late husband's medications, stood at the rail, robe gathered around her like a shroud. She blinked, tears glistening as she spoke. "I never wanted them to suffer, Father. But I tried to steal in desperation, and you judged me." I swallowed. "Callahan," she shook her head, lips trembling. "You didn't see me. You saw only my sin. I came here for mercy, but found only condemnation in your eyes. So I learned to give you a sin worth judging." Her hands unfurled, revealing a small, blood-stained knife. "I wrote the prophecies because I wanted you to see the pain you caused." The chapel reeled as though struck by an earthquake. I staggered back, rosary slipping from my hand, beads clattering across stone. Why kill them, Jessica? The girl by the creek. Sarah Monroe's memory, her eyes filled with fury and grief. They were innocents, collateral to your judgment. Each death was a sacrifice to your guilt, forcing you to feel what I felt. A wrenching pain tore through me, grief for my failures, horror at her vengeance. "Stop this," I begged, voice cracking. Confess to God, and He will forgive. You, she laughed, a hollow, echoing sound. God didn't forgive you, Father, and you didn't forgive me. Sirens wailed outside, echoing through the stained glass windows. The sheriff's cruiser lights splashed crimson on the stone pillars. The world swarmed in lights, voices, footsteps. She looked at me, tears and defiance warring on her face. Confess, Father. I closed my eyes and prayed not for mercy. This time, but for strength. I confess to my failures. I confess to my sins of pride and judgment. But I do not confess to these murders. I opened my eyes. Callahan, forgive me. Let God judge your heart, not me. Her grip on the knife faltered as sheriff's deputies flooded in, weapons drawn. She dropped to her knees, sobbing. Sheriff Walters approached me, his gaze pained. Daniel, are you all right? I nodded, stunned. The final confession had been mine and hers. Faith and morality had collided in this sacred space. Blood and redemption entwined. As Callahan was led away, she whispered, "Tell them, it's their turn now." I watched her disappear into the corridor, conscience aflame. I knelt at the altar, fingertips tracing the cold stone. My voice shook. Lord, have mercy on us all. Outside, dawn broke, pale and fragile, promising a new day. But inside, I remained in the confessional's shadow, forever changed by the revelations of faith, guilt, and the dark duality of man's soul. And, as the first birdsong drifted through the chapel windows, I lifted the rosary and prayed for Callahan, for Jessica, for Sarah, and for myself. The fallen shepherd seeking redemption in the wake of the final confession.